Hi, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I love colorful and sparkly makeup, but I don't love capitalism. Here on my channel, I like to make content focused around consumerism, how it interacts with makeup and beauty and aesthetics, and I always try to talk about consumerism within the larger context of capitalism. So, given my interests here on YouTube, it makes sense that the subject of boycotts would eventually come up, and that's what I want to talk about today. More specifically, I've been thinking a lot about what's happening in Gaza right now, the bombardment, the engineered famine, the ongoing genocide, as well as the occupation of Palestinian lands and just all of the horrific human rights abuses that have been going on in Palestine for decades before October 7th. And I've also been learning a lot more about the BDS movement in support of Palestine than I had previously known. And I have decided to take part in one of the BDS Palestine focused boycotts, which is of L'Oreal and all of its subsidiary brands. And I wanted to make a video talking about that and talking a little bit more about BDS and how it's been changing my thoughts about boycotts and consumption more generally, but definitely mainly with regards to the makeup space. I've struggled a lot with how to structure this video and how to focus it. That's part of why it's taken me so long to make it, and I've re-scripted it and even refilmed it a couple of times. On the one hand, given just the absolute horror of what's happening right now, it feels almost disrespectful to talk about the genocide, the occupation, and then in the same video to talk about myself, my thoughts and feelings, and makeup. Quite frankly, it felt like there wasn't really a good way to talk about those topics together. On the other hand, I'm not an expert on this issue, and I think in some ways it's a trap to say, oh, it's complicated, I'm not an expert. Like, you don't need to be an expert on geopolitics to believe your eyes when you see a genocide happening. Overall, I think the occupation and certainly what's happening now is an issue that's very uncomplicated based on very simple power dynamics. And it's literally a trap of propaganda to convince people that if they're not an expert, they don't have a right to talk about it or have an opinion on it. But I'm also not going to sit here and say that I'm qualified to make long form content about Palestine, the history of Palestine, or the Israeli occupation there. So that also didn't feel like a helpful video for me to create. The balance that I've decided to strike is to link tons of resources down below. So I'm going to have a bunch of links in the description box. I would really encourage you to go follow those links and get the background and context from those people who are experts. I really encourage you in this moment to be informing yourself, seeking out many sources, and seeking out in particular Palestinian sources and Palestinian voices. And I do think it's really important to note here that Palestinian voices are currently being suppressed, at least or especially in the Western media, North American media. Palestinian voices are being actively suppressed on this issue. There is active and ongoing propaganda and censorship that's happening around this issue. If you don't believe me on that, I will be citing all of my sources in the description box, as I've mentioned. And what this means is that even if you're somebody who is generally very informed about the news, there's a really good chance that you're not getting accurate or objective reporting about what's happening in the Gaza Strip now and what's been going on in Palestine for 75 years. So again, I'm not an expert, but I do defer to the people that I'm linking below. And while it's not exhaustive, those are sources that I personally have found incredibly helpful, and I definitely recommend them. I will add the additional disclaimer that I'm not interested in debating facts in the comments. You can feel free to have a conversation there, but I will definitely reserve the right to delete any comments that are spreading disinformation. So I hope this makes sense. I am going to step back and give you a quick overview of what BDS is, what its aims are. I'm going to talk also about why I've chosen to boycott L'Oreal specifically, because there are many, many brands that are currently being boycotted by various groups. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how BDS has given me a lens onto boycotts in general and consumer choices in the makeup space. It's given me a new way to think about things that I think has been incredibly useful for me and that I want to share with you. Again, I don't want to sideline at all the conversation about what's happening right now, like what is physically happening in this moment as I'm speaking to you. So even though I'm not like going into the facts and the background information in this video, that is 100% central to what I'm talking about with regards to BDS. I don't want to sideline that from the conversation. I hope that that makes sense. And as a final disclaimer, I'm sorry that it's taken me so long to make this video, because while I know that nobody out there is like waiting for my take on any given political issue, I have mentioned the fact that I was planning to make this video, I believe, in a few previous videos now. So if you caught those references, I have been working on this for a while and like wanting to do this for a while. Obviously, we're coming up on 6 months now that this current campaign has been happening in the Gaza Strip. And again, I think this is a morally uncomplicated issue. I don't have any qualms about what my position is on it. It's much more that it's nerve-wracking to share your opinion publicly, especially on an issue that I think has been politicized just in the most toxic way, where people are trying to police people's speech. And it's just really not, you know, a welcoming space to wade into at the moment, especially on the internet. We know how the internet is. Again, I think that's a trap, and I think there are forces at work trying to make us feel like we can't speak up about this. So I do feel shitty about feeling nervous about that, especially given all the privilege that I have. It's one thing to share other people's posts on social media, but to sit down and gather your thoughts in an organized way and present them as your own, that is just different. Anyway, I do think it's important that we talk about this, that we make it okay to talk about, imperative to talk about, and that we resist the idea that only some people are allowed to talk about the occupation of Palestine. Anyway, I know I always have a million disclaimers, so thank you for bearing with me during those. I'm gonna get into it now. Let's talk about BDS, and you might be familiar with this already, but I'm just going to give a quick overview. I have some notes on my phone, so I have a bad habit of looking down when I'm looking at notes, just to give you a heads up, that's all that is. So BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. It's a movement that is led by a number of different organizations from Palestinian civil society, you know, various NGOs, labor unions, things like that. And in 2005, these organizations began calling for a boycott of companies that were involved in or complicit in violations of Palestinian human rights. So this is the boycott piece of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And basically, BDS is premised on the idea that the Israeli occupation is made possible by international support. So that's both support from governments and support from international companies. The idea of BDS is to use economic pressure to demand that the government of Israel change its policies that violate human rights. So when we think of sanctions, that would essentially be a government boycotting another country's economy. That's, for example, what the United States does with Iran. That is what many countries did to South Africa to protest its apartheid policies. But because Western governments are not sanctioning Israel, and in fact they are using taxpayer money to actively fund and support the Israeli military, people like us can take this into our own hands by boycotting. So by boycotting international companies that are involved with the Israeli occupation in some way, we can pressure them to end those activities, and this creates more pressure on the Israeli government to change its policies because they don't want people to boycott the Israeli economy. Now, to be absolutely clear, BDS is not a boycott of Jewish businesses. It's a nonviolent, anti-racist movement. It also doesn't aim to harm regular Israeli people. BDS is very focused on specific Israeli government policies that violate human rights and that violate international law. So with that, BDS has 3 specific political demands. Number 1, to end the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and to remove the separation wall that has been built in the West Bank. Number 2, to grant full equality to Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel. Number 3, to respect the right of return for Palestinian refugees. And if you want more information about these specific policies and how they violate human rights, then definitely check out the sources that I have linked. So the BDS movement does have a core list of companies that they are asking people to boycott, and this is not a very long list. There are also certain, like sub-organizations of BDS that call for, different boycotts of maybe local companies. There are also lots of people boycotting companies based on their responses to October 7th, such as McDonald's and Starbucks. And at the end of the day, it's just true that a lot of companies are involved in some way with the occupation. So really it does sort of become a question of choosing your battles. If you go onto the website for the BDS movement, they say, quote, "We focus our boycotts on a small number of companies and products for maximum impact," end quote. So the key with these boycotts is that they are meant to be targeted. And I think that this is a really important point to conceptualize because, a company doesn't care if just a few people are boycotting them, and they also don't care if you are boycotting them sometimes and sometimes you're boycotting other different companies. No, if you're aiming for political impact, for a result that is based on economic pressure, then you want to go for depth and not breadth. And a targeted, organized boycott is going to have the maximum impact. So maximize the number of people who are boycotting the same company at the same time. So this leads us into the question of why I am boycotting L'Oreal specifically. L'Oreal isn't even on that main list of companies to boycott. However, there has been an active boycott of L'Oreal going on since 2008, which I did not know until just a few months ago. And there are a few stated reasons for this boycott. L'Oreal does have an Israeli branch, so they have extensive operations in Israel. Their facility is located on ethnically cleansed land, which obviously a lot of Israel is located on ethnically cleansed land. L'Oreal also does use minerals in certain of their products that are sourced from the Dead Sea. And there are also a few other reasons, but I'm going to link that page on the BDS site so that you can see all the details of it there. Now, at the end of the day, is L'Oreal the worst offender when it comes to Palestinian human rights? I'm going to be honest and say that no, I don't think they are. I mean, just for comparison, HP is on the main BDS boycott list, and they literally make surveillance technology for the Israeli government to use to repress Palestinian civilians. Just within the makeup and beauty space, Johnson & Johnson was granted an award from the Israeli government in 1998 for essentially major contributions to strengthening the Israeli economy. So when it comes to human rights violations and, propping up the Israeli regime, I don't think that L'Oreal is the worst offender. Actually, I'm boycotting L'Oreal because other people are boycotting L'Oreal. So I wanted to get more involved in BDS, given the escalations after October 7th. And as somebody who loves makeup, I wanted to choose a big parent company to boycott that was in the makeup and beauty space. Because those companies that are on the main list, I don't purchase from them, but I also don't, like, I wouldn't necessarily have planned to purchase from them. To take the example of HP, I actually have an HP computer that I bought years ago. I would not plan to repurchase an HP computer, but I don't buy computers that often and I don't care about computers. Same goes for many of the other companies on that list, such as SodaStream and Puma. So personally, I wanted to focus my boycotting energy somewhere where it would make more of a difference to me and to my decisions. But at the same time, it did not feel realistic to me to boycott every single makeup and beauty brand that has some involvement with the Israeli occupation. And, you know, there are a lot of beauty brands that do, and there are a lot of beauty brands that are on various boycott lists depending on what source you look at. Even the parent company of Sephora has, you know, ties to Israel that have gotten it placed on certain boycott lists. So to boycott all these beauty brands, and frankly to boycott Sephora, it didn't feel doable to me. I know it's not a hardship, I know it's not the end of the world, but it just didn't feel like a very realistic choice to me as somebody who participates so heavily in the makeup space. So I was in search of guidance on this topic when a few months ago I saw that the Makeup Archives here on YouTube posted a video on this very topic, and specifically on her boycott of L'Oreal. The Makeup Archives has an awesome YouTube channel. I had already been following her. She used to use the handle Booze Beauty, so it's possible that you know her under that name, but she posts great content. I will definitely have her linked down below, as well as the specific video that I'm talking about, but she has been boycotting L'Oreal for a few years, and she made a video a few months ago talking through her decision to do that and giving some tips on sort of navigating the beauty space from that perspective and where you can look for alternatives. So I definitely recommend checking that video out, and definitely all the credit goes to her for turning me onto this and giving me all that information. So just to kind of put my money where my mouth is, I pulled them out and I want to show you some of the L'Oreal products that I have in my collection that I love and that I am not planning to repurchase. So one of the big ones is CeraVe. This was a holy grail. This one definitely hurt. Same with Garnier. I've repurchased their skincare for years. Maybelline, I have a couple of their lip products that I really like. Urban Decay, and this one hurt as well because I really love their Moon Dust eyeshadow. I have the shade Space Cowboy. I use it all the time. NYX is also owned by L'Oreal. This is the one that kind of hurt the most for me, especially because they are a cruelty-free drugstore brand. I have their color correcting palette, and I've really, really loved their concealer. This was a favorite. I also have tons of lip products from them, the soft matte lip creams, the butter gloss, their lip liner. So I'm not planning on getting rid of these products. I'm going to, you know, continue to use them, but I will not be repurchasing them, and for certain things, you know, I'm going to be looking for replacements. And of course, I'm not going to be buying new products from those brands. Those are brands that I'm boycotting from here on out. So like I said, I do love some of these products, but it's not like there aren't alternatives out there. And so for me, that feels like a really good place to begin boycotting, because it will involve changing my purchasing decisions. And that means that it's worthwhile. You know, it's going to make at least some amount of difference. It's not a completely pointless exercise, but at the same time, it feels like a realistic change that I can stick to. And other people are boycotting L'Oreal specifically as well, and that means that my small impact will be compounded with other people's small impact, and my boycott will therefore have as much impact as possible. And I think that overall, this has been an incredibly useful way for me to reframe my thinking around consumerism, ethical consumerism, conscious consumerism, how I make decisions, and how I see my actions fitting into the whole. Because I think it's really familiar for us in the makeup space to talk about no longer supporting a brand. We'll say, you know, I don't support that brand, or I'm not supporting that brand currently. And it's really common also for people to talk about this explicitly as a result of a brand's problematic behavior or a problematic person who's attached to a brand. And I think that's absolutely great. I think there are really, really good reasons to do that. Whether it's because you don't want to feel negative emotions when you look at your vanity, whether it's because you don't want your money to go contribute to a cause you don't support or a person that you think is odious. Maybe the brand has done something racist or transphobic that you feel personally harmed by, or that your friends feel personally harmed by. Again, there's really, really great reasons to cut your ties with the brand, to stop purchasing from them, and to say that you no longer support that brand. However, for myself personally, when I've thought about my decision to support or not support a brand, to purchase from or not purchase from a specific company, those decisions are often coming from a place of guilt. Often from a place of not wanting to feel like I am personally complicit in something that goes against my values. And that feels like an internal decision. That feels like something that's about my relationship to myself. And I think that framing of these consumer choices as being personal, ethical decisions, it's distinct from thinking about a boycott as a collective political decision. A boycott is something that's political, it's collective, and is organized. And a boycott has specific political demands, some sort of change that it's aiming to achieve. And boycotts have been successful in the past. They were used during the civil rights movement in the US, they were used during apartheid in South Africa, and in the 1930s, Jewish organizers led an international boycott of Germany in protest of its discriminatory policies against Jewish people. And now today, we also see the BDS movement having real political impact. For example, Puma has been on the BDS boycott list for years because of its sponsorship of a soccer league that plays inside illegal settlements in the West Bank. And just in December, Puma actually announced that it was ending that sponsorship. And so while one approach is based around guilt, the other approach is based around action. And a boycott genuinely assumes that your decisions have an impact. This is such a simple thing, and maybe it sounds silly because I've come on here before talking about the footprint of our consumption, talking about the real societal impacts. Like, I am somebody who believes that our decisions have a footprint. But I feel like I was believing in the negative impact of my decisions, but I almost wasn't believing in the positive impact of making the opposite decision. Does this make any sense? I don't think I was thinking of my decisions as things that could actually affect change. And so while I think it's all well and good to not want to be complicit, to want to make decisions that you feel personally, ethically good about, that you can personally respect yourself for, that's all well and good. But I still think it's just fundamentally more powerful to think more about the collective political possibilities of your decisions, because that's a mindset that believes in the possibility of positive change. And I like that idea just philosophically and politically, because I think that, like, capitalism and corporations and the forces that are supporting and upholding capitalism, those forces don't want us to believe that we can have a positive impact. Capitalism works to isolate us. Capitalism makes us feel like we are the problem. Capitalism blames us as individuals for the problems that capitalism creates. I think a really great example of this is the rhetoric that you see around climate change and environmental problems. You have these two paradoxical narratives, which on the one hand says that climate change is our fault as individuals, that is the result of our personal decisions to drive cars, to fly, to have children. But at the same time, we are told that our individual changes won't make a difference, and so we might as well not bother. When at the end of the day, we know that this is all a distraction. Fossil fuel companies are to blame for climate change. Real climate action has to come from, governments and corporations and collective action. But capitalism focuses our attention on individual choices and individual impact. And ultimately, this just serves capitalism. This just serves those same companies that don't want change to happen. This rhetoric makes us feel like problems are our fault, but at the same time that our individual power to make a difference is negligible. And so because of this, we don't make changes, and more importantly, we don't demand changes from companies. I know that this departs a little bit from the topic at hand, but I think it's an example of what I'm talking about here. If we don't believe that our decisions to boycott a company are actually going to make a difference, if we're making those decisions purely out of guilt and personal responsibility, then we are so much less likely to make those decisions. We're so much less likely to band together and demand change through means like boycotts. And just from my own personal experience, I can already tell you that the framing of a boycott is more effective than the framing of personal responsibility. Because the fact is, I had wanted to move away from L'Oreal for a while now because I'm sort of trying to transition my collection to be cruelty-free or free of animal testing, and many L'Oreal brands are not certified cruelty-free. For example, CeraVe, I had already been sort of searching for alternatives. I had already bought my last CeraVe tub before I had decided to go cruelty-free. But then when I couldn't find a suitable alternative by the time I needed a replacement, I just bought this. I just repurchased it. And I broke the promise that I had made to myself to no longer support CeraVe because I didn't feel good about it morally and ethically. Now that I am framing this decision as a boycott, I'm no longer worried. So that experience proved to me that, at least for myself, thinking about things in terms of political decisions, in terms of political boycotts, that's just more effective. I'm just more likely to stick to my commitments if those are the motivations behind them. Another way to think of this is as a promise to yourself versus a promise to other people, because personally, I find it so much easier to break a promise to myself than I do to break a promise that I've made to other people. So a boycott feels like a promise to other people because it's something that we're doing together, and it's something that I'm doing because I believe in the impact that it can have on the world. Now, I hope this makes sense. I feel like I've talked myself in knots about this, and this is another part of why I've had so much trouble scripting this and filming this. It's not like I'm advocating some huge change here. I'm just sharing with you how my thoughts have changed about consumerism since diving into the BDS movement and the idea of political boycotts as a political strategy going back, obviously, many, many years. And maybe to you this sounds like a naive point of view. Maybe it sounds like I'm not really saying anything at all and there's really no distinction here. But either way, all I'm talking about really is a mindset change, which for me has been eye-opening. And I appreciate that. I also feel like it's relevant to the conversation here to mention that the right to boycott is being eroded right now in the United States, possibly other places too, but I recently watched a documentary called Boycott, which I will link in the sources. I would highly recommend that. It's really interesting and surprising and disturbing, given all the rhetoric that exists in the US around free speech and money as speech. Even so, there are forces that are trying to take away the right to boycott, and specifically to take away the right to boycott Israel. So that's that's another interesting rabbit hole that I invite you to go down. And I think that just illustrates the power that boycotts do have. So I'm sure this video has been a very long ride, so thank you so much for bearing with me. I want to reiterate that of course, makeup isn't going to free Palestine. Human rights, genocide, Palestinian liberation, Palestinian sovereignty, these are the things that are really at the heart of this conversation, and I don't want to sideline those things whatsoever. I'm just coming at this from the point of view of consumerism and capitalism and makeup, because that just feels like one of the small things that I can do in this moment. I'm not saying that you need to boycott L'Oreal. I'm certainly not judging anybody who isn't. That said, if you do want to join the boycott, I would love that. Feel free to let us know here. Again, please check out the sources that I have linked. And as a closing thought, I just want to say that informing yourself is really, really powerful right now. In the context of censorship and propaganda, learning about this issue and talking about it, those are both really important forms of resistance. So thank you so much for watching. Of course, free Palestine, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.